Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor Greg Dooley and the Pundit Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
That's right, it's the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark, and we are proudly presented by Nick Hopwood, who's our certified financial planner, founder and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. Greg, we are gearing up for the Rose Bowl. We'd like to again thank to all our listeners and hope that you can please review and share with your friends to tell us what you think, what changes we can try, do some experimenting. But you went to the Michigan Bust on Sunday.
I did. I saw a few fans of the Professor and the Pundit there again. Our reach is pretty strong. The best way that you can tell us that you're listening is to follow us. We also got some new comments, so thank you for those folks. But yeah, I ran into a few folks at the Bust, or what I guess is now the Bust, Steve. And I say that because some of you in the area are familiar with the Michigan football Bust, and it was something that for a long time was held at a place called Laurel Manor in Livonia, which is a big like dining hall type of place. Have you been there before?
Yes.
Yeah. And I've been there for other stuff too. And, you know, you can seat 1,000+ people at tables, and they sling out the cordon bleu or whatever, and the drinks and the soup and the salad. It's that kind of thing.
If you got a big wedding,
a big
wedding, you could have it there. Or if you have a big corporation with hundreds of employees, this is something where you could have a Christmas party or whatever type of meeting
like
you want.
Tommy DeVito's wedding for the Giants, like probably something like that, right? So that's where they used to have it for as long as I can remember. And I don't know if it was COVID, I don't know if it was Harbaugh, but somebody said, no, we want to do a smaller, tighter event on campus. And I think it was a little of both. And so they moved it to have in the last few years, a smaller celebration with just the team, families, a few fans at Chrysler Arena. And there were public tickets. I didn't know. There were some public tickets available to this last one. And I don't know if that's been the case before. But yeah, I got to check it out. By the way, was I at the Rich Rod Busts? Yes. Was I at the one?
You raise me up.
Thank you. So most of you probably listening know what we're talking about, but there was this. Were you there at that one?
No.
Okay. So I was there, and it was at the end of Rich Rod's tenure, let's call it. And he started to make this emotional speech or plea, and he started to reference a song and how this song just would pick him up off the floor, and he really wanted everyone to hear it. And he asked everyone to stand up, hold hands, if I recall correctly, and raise your hands up. And it was our man, Josh Groban, singing, "You Raise Me Up." And they blasted it in Laurel Manor. And there were some confused people. There were some people who were into it. There was a lot. There was a few jaw drops.
You want to talk about taking the temperature in your room. You know, sometimes you get an AD to give you that support, that vote of confidence. But usually you know whether people like you or not when you ask them to do something uncomfortable. So, for instance, in Indianapolis at Lucas Oil Stadium, Jim Harbaugh says to the crowd, there's a little saying that we have here at the University of Michigan, who's got it better than us? And everybody. So, Jim Harbaugh, 100% support. If you don't have that type of support and you're going to ask people to stand up and hold hands and sing along, you know who your friends are at that point.
That's right.
And who is ready to kick you out the door.
We could talk about, this is probably a show, Steve. It's just breaking this down. But you also have to wonder, like when everyone's kind of against you and Ann Arbor Torch and Pitchfork is sold out, right? And this was around that time. And who did he bounce this off of? Because obviously they had the tape ready and everything.
This wasn't exactly spontaneous, was it?
So this was the Circle of Trust, who I think was Rita Rod, his wife, maybe Dusty, his consigliere, you know?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so it was something else, man. I've also heard that there is a videotape of this out there that the athletic department has said, whoever has that tape, do not show this tape.
Dr. Sapp?
I don't think Sapp has it. I think it's our buddy Art Volo in his collection.
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying he does or doesn't, but
Right.
I may have heard, and Art usually is at these things taping
Yes.
them. By the way, can I do a plug for Art?
Sure.
I'll put Art's info in the notes. Art does cuts of full games with all of like the post-game highlights, a lot of the post-game interviews, sights and sounds, pre-game and post-game, and he cuts up the games and sells them for cost. And you can buy the whole season of Art's work. I think he goes to the away games too. You can buy like the whole season for like 130, 40, 50 bucks of all of the games. Now, they're on DVD, and I've talked to Art. I'm like, Art, just make them downloadable. Yeah, you're going to have some people share them and things like that, but people burn CDs, DVDs too. So anyway, I'll put a link to that in the show notes if that's something you'd like. You know, I bet a lot of our audience would like it, and I know Art does good work. So anyway, maybe when you order, you could say, hey, Art, can you slip in the You Raise Me Up band video in there too? So I don't know if he'll do that.
I got a story behind this.
Okay.
He would take all the WJR audio and he would record his own games from in press row, merge the audio with his video.
So you're talking about the radio calls against the TV.
Yeah.
Yes.
But back in the day, it was Bob
Brilliant.
Buford, Frank Beckman, and all that.
Brilliant.
And it'd be the whole thing. And one day I told him, I said, you should try to make this within an hour. And he said, how do you do that? And I said, because I thought, 3-hour games are kind of long to sit through.
Oh, I got you.
Let me cut one up for you. So I did the 1991 Michigan-Ohio State game and did it within like an hour and a half, or I can't remember exactly what I timed it down to. Got rid of all the meaningless 1-yard carries, the incomplete passes.
Can I clarify? But you did it with you also did it with the WJR, the radio call? Okay. So you okay, got it.
So I cut it all up, the video and the audio all together, presented it to him. And I think about maybe 3 or 4 years later, there was something called ESPN Classic.
Right. Okay. Which is basically that.
It was more time rigor to fit protocol. I was doing this whole thing, that type of work, for years. And some games were 12 minutes and other games were an hour and a half or 2 hours. But yeah, I did that with him, and he was showing that off at some point.
Okay.
30 years ago.
Well, I'll tell you that he does also sell all those old games, and you can get the U for ones. Like you can get the full 1979 Indiana game, Wangler to Carter, but get the full game with the U for call, and they're really good. That's actually for the local fans here. That's what WTK used to play on bye weeks. Is they basically get U or Dr. Sapp's. I forget because I know Sapp does kind of the same thing. They're cut-ups of the games of the radio calls, which is kind of cool. So off Rich Rod for a minute. So he does the You Raise Me Up. Of course, it's a big bomb, and I think Rich Rod's gone, shortly thereafter.
Correct.
If I recall correctly, yeah. So anyway, they moved the bust away from Laurel Manor, but the whole thing is still thrown on by the U of M Club of Detroit. So interesting fact, I didn't know this. The Club of Detroit says its roots are in 1895, Steve.
So they wore Abe Lincoln-like top hats.
So for those of you in my history class, that's 1 year before the founding of the Big Ten Conference, right? This is old school U of M club, and they are the biggest alumni group, but they put this thing on. And kind of the claim to fame, other than the bust itself, is that they are responsible for handing out these M rings. And these are supposed to go to, I'll just use the word seniors. Seniors who have been in good standing with the team get this it's not a fancy bowl ring. It's not adorned with all these jewels. It's just a black M, kind of on a flat circle in a gold band, kind of old school. And I don't think they've changed the design forever. And they've been giving these out to the seniors at the bus. That's kind of was the thing, right? It moves to Chrysler Arena, and I'm there. So they were giving them out, but here's what happened. Harbaugh decided, and I think this was part of how do we celebrate this 1,000th milestone win. Harbaugh went back and he asked Dave Abloff and the staff there to go back through all of the Michigan rosters. And what they did was they gave one of those M Club of Detroit rings to any staffer who's been on for 10 years consecutively to support the team. So I'm talking about equipment people, video people, right? All these different people through the years. This is going back all time, okay? And any 5-year consecutive coaches. So if you've served 5 years on the team in a consecutive fashion, you get one too. And they counted over 100 people that they found that met this criteria, and many of them were there last night, and so they invited them. Our friend Bruce Made, of course, has way more than 10 years on staff. He has like 30 years, in his staff as the SID. And they brought them all up on stage and they gave them the ring. And I can tell you that while a lot of these people have bowl rings and championship rings, if they were part of the 1997 team, this was almost like getting a letter jacket, that kind of feel. You could see that they were touched, at least most of them. It was a pretty cool gesture. Like, oh, and by the way, one of those people, of course, is Jack Harbaugh. So Harbaugh himself listed the people who were there and had him come on stage. And he's like, Jack Harbaugh, like, so, Dad.
So U of M, believing in inclusion, decided to take something that was just players only. And if you were a dedicated M guy, and that was defined by 10 consecutive years as a staffer or 5 years as a coach.
I believe that was
something
thing.
like that.
Yeah, something like that. You got it.
You would be able to get this ring.
By the way, and if you are passed away, they are making arrangements to get it to your family. And I believe they went all the way back in time. So I think they are looking for, trying to find certain families way back. But I thought it was pretty cool. So there were 20 plus people I know. Mary Passink, who is a friend, and that was Bo's longtime personal assistant. And she's awesome. But they brought like Mike Gittleson. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Former strength and conditioning coach.
Yes. So I found myself going, I don't know if I've ever seen Mike Gittleson. And you're like, well, yeah, Dooley. I'm like, no, I've been around the program quite a bit, and I've been a lot of these things. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen Gittleson in person. I don't think he's a very public guy outside of Schembecker Hall, and I'm sure he's invited back, but I don't see him at these things. And interesting cat, man. He's an interesting looking dude in the first place. Okay, I'll just say that. He served, I believe, in Vietnam. He's portrayed in Mountaintop, the new book on the 97 team, who we interviewed, earlier this year. We may have those guys back on, by the way, given the timing of our quest for a national championship. But he got up there and he had some really, really nice words. You could see he was touched. And I got to say, one thing that stuck out, his eyes, man. Like, what do you mean? He's got like these light blue sapphire eyes, like the Night King of Game of Thrones. Like, well, you're like, well, where were you sitting? Dude, I was in the seats in Chrysler Arena and he was pretty far away, but I couldn't like look away. I'm like, I can't imagine this guy staring at me in a weight room, like yelling at me, like, dude. That was cool. And then
imagine if he just raised a finger at you.
I know. Bob Thornblade got up there. Now, if you listen to WTK Radio, you may know Bob Thornblade. He usually calls in Jamie Morris's show in the afternoon. He is a kind of a longtime assistant coach. Obviously, he got one of the M rings. He gets up there, and I love the man, but he can tend to be a little long-winded on the radio. Like, I think Jamie goes and makes a sandwich when Blade comes on for his previews.
He used to be on the broadcast with Beckman, too.
Oh, did he?
On the radio broadcast.
Okay, so he's probably in some of your cut-ups and Art's thing. So he's really good. Like, he knows his stuff. He's got a great, energetic voice. But I'm like, uh-oh, Blade's up there. How long is this going to go? But he had really good words. But you know what he talked about? He talked about the 1973 athletic director vote and how that team was denied a chance to have what this team has, which is a chance to play for a national title. And it wasn't a short reference, Steve. It was, we got screwed by a Big Ten vote. I don't want any of you to forget that. He said, I already talked to the team about it. It was like...
Well, we talked about it too, because the odds were incredible that Michigan, through all of this off the field news could still keep it together and be undefeated, because if they were going to lose a game, it would be over. And of course, all the reputations would be sullied too.
Yeah.
What Michigan did with this team was manage to take for the most part of that away, because people saw that they won it on the field anyway. So there was enormous pressure on them to continue to win, and they did that. And there was ready to be a vote again about whether they should even be eligible. So I guess in a way, Blade could be like saying, you're not only playing for yourselves, but you're playing for us in '73 as well.
Yeah, that was de facto part of his message. And speaking of playing for us, our buddy Brandy, Jim Brandstetter, won the Gerald R. Ford. It's like the Lifetime Achievement Award from the football team. And he got up there, and what did Brandy do? All he did was make an appeal for people to understand the history of the Michigan football program. All the names, and this ties to the book he has, his Voices book that he has out, his audio book. We'll put a link to it in the show notes, where he interviews like players going all the way back to some players from 1927. And he talked about it a little bit, Steve, in an interview from whatever episode that was that we posted when we did the live shot before the season on Fantastic Friday. But he got up there, and all he talked about was, you need to learn this history, because even the Blake Corms and the JJs, you'll be forgotten in 30 years if we don't celebrate these former players. That was kind of his message. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there as the guy who teaches the history of college athletics, which is really codenamed the history of Michigan football. And I'm getting these people elbowing me. He's talking about you, Dooley. You got to teach this class. So it was cool to hear just his appeal, and great to see Brandy. A little interesting. Do you know who got the MVP award from the team?
J.J. McCarthy.
He sure did. Does that surprise you at all?
I think it would be between him and Mike Sainristil.
Exactly. I thought it might go to Mikey just because, well, we don't know JJ's status for next year. It's a tough one, but great event. It's not as festive, say, as the Bust, where there's liquor and there's food and there's more time to mingle and meet the families. And at the Bust, there was always a time where you could go by and say, get your program signed by all the players and say hi and thank them and that kind of stuff. And all that's been cut out. So glad I went. Again, I didn't stay for the whole thing, but I caught some of that stuff. Oh, got to see my man Ben Herbert beforehand, talk to him for a little bit. Hopefully I'll have him back in my leadership class. He is one of my absolute favorites, man. That's a special dude.
Got to see both strength conditioning coaches, longtime famous strength and conditioning coaches.
Yeah, so now I don't know where the basketball team is right now, Steve. Of course, we were in the home of the basketball team, which is named after one of the famous people that Brandy mentioned in his speech. So Juwan Howard, is he back now as full-time coach?
So he had his first day, Saturday afternoon against Eastern Michigan. Michigan was shooting well against the Eagles and had a comfortable lead throughout, a double-digit lead most of the game. Wasn't a 30, 40-point win or anything like that, but next game was against the University of Florida.
So have you heard anything else about this little dust-up with Coach Sanderson and the strength coach that is, and have you heard anything else? Does it look like that's done?
Ward Manuel put out a statement Friday night that says Juwan is back as our head coach, and in a side note, he's basically been cleared. But it isn't exactly over because Coach Sanderson wasn't on the bench on Saturday. So I don't know if this is going to continue forward. I don't know what the status of Coach Sanderson is at this point.
Somebody mentioned a comment or a take from Human Resources at U of M. And right. I don't know if that was a confirmed,
We believe that, something was taken to HR. That is the scuttlebutt on and off the street, that it was, taken to HR. HR's reviewed it. Juwan Howard is the head coach. And Juwan was asked about it Saturday after the game, and he just wanted to refer to Ward Manuel's statement, which is on Friday. So there's not much news at this point at the time of the recording. Most of the press conference was reserved about Juwan really opening up, besides the Sanderson issue, really opening up about what he went through after having the open heart surgery and lying awake in the middle of the night and contemplating on whether coaching is for him, what he wants to do, how he will attack it, how will he take care of himself through all that. And I thought that was kind of amazing to listen to his firsthand response to all of that didn't seem to be filtered.
Okay. Well, that's always good to hear something interesting in a press conference. We don't get a lot of that
No.
at Michigan. So, look, the other thing that we've heard is that Jace was involved, his son, right? And he was somehow involved in how this started with Sanderson. And I'll say that I don't hear a lot of people talking about this, but one quiet concern I've heard about Juwan, especially when Jet was there, is that, and again, I don't have to substantiate it, but I'll throw it out there, that there were either special rules or special handling of his kids, meaning Jet and Jace, while they were both here and maybe now. And while this doesn't necessarily support that was going on, this doesn't exactly not lend credence to that argument that maybe there is a special treatment for those two. But Jet's gone. Jace is here, who, by the way, is everything I can see. And I haven't had Jace in class, so don't ask me. But I see him all over campus. Like, he looks like he's a model student athlete. Like, just from appearances, I can tell you that. He looks like a great young man. Juwan's a great dude. I mean, he is. So I wonder if some of that is in play here, where he's got a special emotional trigger for those guys, and it may have affected the team. I don't know. We'll see. I do still like, and since we did our broadcast, Steve, and they had the Iowa win, now they've got this one. They seem to be looking a little better. Getting that Big Ten win was important. They do seem to have the pieces and parts of maybe an NCAA tournament qualifying team. That seems to be the ceiling for me right now. Where are you at with this team?
Well, first of all, they got to play defense. And when you see Michigan play against the better teams in the Big Ten, they're going to have to do that. And to be in the NCAA tournament, I believe they're going to have an above 500 record in Big Ten play, at least make a little bit of noise in the Big Ten tournament if they're going to have a shot. They don't have a marquee win. They do have a quad one win at Iowa that will probably stand throughout the entire season in the net rankings. But they're going to have plenty more of those. And you got to start that by playing defense. And the second thing, and we talked about this last week, is they've got to win close games. In games decided by 6 points or less, they've lost 12 of the last 13 last season and lost close games with Oregon and Indiana. Problems inbounding the ball.
Yeah. Well, we actually saw
gaping.
A little of that in the Iowa game. Like, there were some were some times when they were up 20 and suddenly they were up 12.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, but there's always the basketball teams always have runs,
Sure,
you know,
sure.
but they got to be able to close out games. And until they can do that, I just don't see them as an NCAA tournament team.
All right, let's head to the locker room. I'm going to get a drink. I'm going to towel off. We're going to hear from Nick Hopwood. How about it? Let's go.
And Nick is our title sponsor of the program. Nick Hopwood is a certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. And Nick, you're familiar with retirement calculators. I've seen them as well. And one of the big questions that they always ask is, how much money do you plan on spending per month for the rest of your life? And my thing is, I think it kind of changes over time. And I've asked my parents about this as well. At what point in their life did they see their expenses per month dramatically go down because they're no longer taking those big trips or buying those big one-time expensive items?
That's a really good thing for you to do, Steve, because we do see these go-go years in early retirement where you're spending just the same as you were while you're working, plus maybe some extra trips, right? That vacation budget. And for everyone, the age is different. And what I see is probably late 70s. You shift into these slow-go years, go-go into slow-go. So you're spending less, not because costs are going down, but you're just slowing down yourself, consuming less goods and services. And then there's that no-go period where you really are not doing much. So like an elderly person, I'm trying to get an appointment with them so they can come in and maybe sign a form. And they say, well, I can't come in on Thursday because I have to go to the bank that day. Like, that's low.
That's the bank day.
Yeah, that you do one thing per day. She's going to the bank, so she can't come drop in for a signature,
So
kind of a
she's
thing.
spreading it out. Okay, I get it.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those are the no-go years, all right? And it's different for everyone, probably based on health as well, right? So we have to be aware of these things, but it's hard to model because we don't know when those times will be taking place.
Yeah, and I know it depends because my parents are in their 80s and still traveling and doing all that stuff. So it definitely depends.
If you have any questions for Nick, it's really easy to get a hold of him. Call 734-681-7575 or reach out at peakwm.com. That's peakwm.com.
Thank you, Nick. Again, I haven't confirmed. I got to confirm with Nick whether he's going to be in Pasadena. I assume so, Steve. And if we get a chance, we'll have to get with him, man. Maybe have a drink after the game, a celebratory drink, and talk to Nick. But there's still news going on. In fact, the National Signing Day, Part 1, as we call it, it does look like there's a few high-profile guys on the horizon, Steve. What do we got?
Yeah, well, everybody's looking forward to signing day. This is the big signing day of the group. There's another one that's traditionally been in February. That's kind of part 2, and there'll probably be a little bit of action there, but most of the big names are going to be officially enrolling or, signing their letter of intent on this Wednesday. And the top 3 are top 100 guys. First guy is Andrew Sprague, who's a 6'8" offensive tackle. He's a top 100 recruit, as well as Jaden Davis, top 10 quarterback recruit, possibly the heir apparent for J.J. McCarthy in the coming years. He'll be a freshman in 2024. And then you got Jordan Marshall, and he's the top player in the state of Ohio. Big recruiting coup because Michigan and Ohio State wanted this guy, and just like in the old days, Michigan took the best player in the state of Ohio and made him a Wolverines. And then the quarterback situation for next year is kind of interesting. We still don't know if J.J. McCarthy is going to come back for his senior year or whether he'll go on to the NFL. And lately, there's been rankings that suggest that J.J. could be picked in the top 10 late in the first round. Everybody seems to agree he's a very interesting draft pick because the lack of a number of pass attempts on tape makes it more of a gamble for some teams to pick. Of course, if he has a great playoff against Alabama and against whether Texas or Washington in the final, if they're able to make it there, that could make the decision easy for everybody. But at that point, who does Michigan have for 2024? Do they go to a true freshman and play right away? I don't think so. I think they'll try to find somebody in the portal. The problem is a lot of top-tier quarterbacks are going elsewhere. And really, the Big Ten, Greg, we can look along this list. The Big Ten is, having a transformation in quarterbacks for 2024. There were about 3 decent quarterbacks in the Big Ten last year, and I'll include Kyle McCord in that group of 3. But the new Big Ten with the new teams coming in from the old Pac-12, quarterback play is going to be a lot better next year than it is this year.
So who are some of the guys? We talked a little bit about Michigan State's, that hot prospect last time, right?
Aiden Childs.
Yeah, they're slobbering over him.
Yeah, one of the hottest prospects going through. Now, he was the backup to, DJ Uiagalelei, who is still uncommitted about where he's going to go. But Aiden Childs is a guy with a whole lot of potential. He was at Oregon State. He's coming with the new coach to Michigan State. So Michigan State, has their quarterback. Now, will he be ready to go and be a top 5 quarterback in this conference from the get? It's hard to say. But Childs appears to be a better prospect than any of the Michigan State quarterbacks they've had over the past few years. But you have Dylan Gabriel, the surefire Oklahoma quarterback, throwing 60, 70 points per game for an Oklahoma offense, now going to Oregon. So he's going to replace Bo Nix. Things aren't going to change in Oregon. It's going to be a high-flying offense that looks very similar to Ohio State.
Yeah, and he's good, man. He was the guy. They beat Texas early on. Is that who
Yes.
they beat? And I'm like, okay, this looks like a guy who's on a mission. He's going to have a Heisman kind of season after that game, right? Beat Texas at the end of the game. So he's going to Oregon, and he's instantly going to be a Heisman candidate or Heisman favorite, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
At Oregon, yeah.
He's going to be definitely on the watch list.
And in the Big Ten.
And then there were reports of Michigander Dante Moore looking at Michigan again, but on Monday night, he decided to go to Oregon as well. Now, Gabriel has only 1 year of eligibility, so Moore can redshirt in 2024, heal up from the beating that he took at UCLA, and still have 3 years for the Ducks. And another dangerous dual-threat quarterback is Will Howard out of Kansas State. He just announced that he's transferring to USC. So the Big Ten is getting loaded at QB. And then Washington is getting Will Rogers out of Mississippi State. You go,
Also in
who
the Big
cares?
Ten.
Who cares, Mississippi State? Well, Will Rogers has 12,000 yards in his collegiate career. That's number 2 in the SEC for all time. And he ranks 4th in the SEC in all time with 94 career touchdowns. He is going to the Huskies. Now, this is kind of similar to getting an experienced quarterback like they got from Michael Penix leaving Indiana to go to the Huskies. Now Will Rogers is going to be that experienced guy with 1 year of eligibility to play for the Huskies, and the Huskies will do this all over again in 2025. The Badgers out of Wisconsin get Tyler Van Dyke out of Miami. Interesting note for Tyler, he's going to go for the extreme heat and humidity to playing in the cold tundra out in Madison, Wisconsin. That would be quite a different
vibe in Madison as well than down in Miami.
Oh, yeah, completely. But Tyler Van Dyke is an accomplished quarterback. And Nebraska last week looked like they were on the verge of getting Dylan Raiola, the number 1 recruit in the class of 2024, and Kyle McCord. But now McCord is going to Syracuse. Greg, Dylan Raiola, the number 1 guy in the class of 2024, but he is committed potentially to 3 different colleges and as many high schools in the last 2 years. This guy just seems like a short-term guy no matter where he decides to go.
Yeah, I love this because for those of you on Twitter, there's the site Message Board Geniuses, and what they usually show are like meltdowns and people's like, I'm done with program X. And of course, that's been turned on us quite a bit in the last few weeks with all the sign stealing stuff. But boy, they had a field day with the Georgia fans freaking out over the prospect of losing this guy to Nebraska and like what it's going to mean to their program. So yeah, he seems like he's a little froggy. He's a hopper.
Yeah,
okay.
He may dance around like that video game too, just avoiding traffic.
He's a jumper. He's a jumper.
And we haven't even thrown Ohio State in there. We don't know what Ohio State's going to do. So I mean, look, Michigan and Ohio State are looking to go after some guys, and some of the guys that have performed really well in 2023 have already made a decision to play elsewhere, even outside the Big Ten. Riley Leonard is over at Notre Dame now. That's former Duke quarterback. He's going to Notre Dame, not in the Big Ten. Michigan's not playing this year. Who cares? But the thing is, the pool, the choose from, if you're going to have to get somebody from the portal, is getting less and less and less.
So, JJ, let's just agree that he's a different kind of cat. Like, that said, if he's a top 10 pick, you kind of got to say, hey, JJ, it's, you understand if he goes to the NFL. Okay.
Absolutely.
If it's outside of that, and let's just assume the NIL opportunities, in quotes, are going to be here for him if he wants to stick around. He does have the opportunity to do something pretty special, whether they win the national title or not. But he could be, the most accomplished Michigan quarterback in history. He's already in that conversation as far as wins are concerned. So he does have something special.
I want to stop you right there for a moment because there's 2 decisions in play in this whole thing. One, does JJ have a very successful playoff into 2024?
Yep.
And second of all, is Jim Harbaugh going to be the coach at Michigan in 2024? And I think for him to stay and whatever NIL inducements are there, I think a lot of it has to do, hey, is my head coach going to be there? And is there a reason for me to stay other than him? Because again, as you said, top 10, maybe I don't need to. But the other thing to look at, a lot of these top-notch quarterbacks going to bad teams all the way around with bad offensive lines and bad protection can ruin NFL quarterbacks. Somebody like JJ might say, hey, it's okay to be for an experienced team like a Seattle Seahawks who is still playing with Geno Smith. He's not long-term. Minnesota is not long-term with Kirk Cousins. If somebody later in the draft wants to pick J.J. McCarthy as a late first-round quarterback, that might work to his advantage. It may not matter where in the first round JJ goes. It might be beneficial for him to go.
No doubt. Question for you, does it work at all the other way? Does JJ staying or going influence Jim Harbaugh's decision to stay or go, do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what if one of those 2 buddies get together in California and hang out and have a conversation? No?
I think there are. I think they've already had it, probably.
Right.
But, I think they've already had these type of conversations. And, of course, Jim Harbaugh were to leave to go in the NFL. There's also other quarterbacks potentially be looked at, depending on where Jim would be going. But we have no idea whether he's going anywhere. We know that a contract is out for him to sign, has not been signed yet, probably won't be signed until after the playoff run, and by then he'll probably make his mind up where he wants to go. And does that have anything to do with seeing which quarterback he can get in the portal to play in 2024? Who knows?
Yeah, what we don't know about the contract is what it says about if there are provisions for if the NCAA does this or that, right? We don't know what it says and what it does and what they said. We don't know what the buyout is. Like, we don't know anything. We just know there's no contract signed, because if it were, we would probably know that. They would want to tell us. Speaking of quarterbacks, did you see that our hometown hero, CJ Carr, is already in camp at Notre Dame?
He already had a practice under his belt last week.
Yeah, so this is Lloyd Carr's grandson, and he's a 5-star recruit out of Saline, which is where Steve and I are from, the hometown of Oscars. And he's already being mentioned in press conferences by the coach, and it's kind of wild to see as someone we've kind of watched develop as a young man. Do we have any big names that are in camp practicing with the team that you're aware of?
Well, there's Jeremiah Beasley. He's a 4-star from down the street in Belleville. He's with the team and practicing for the Bowl.
Okay, cool. So I have a question for you, Steve. Does all the shuffling, does the transfer portal, especially with all these names that you mentioned, does it make college football more interesting and more exciting for you? Because some people argue this. So, it's very easy to go, college football is ruined. It's free agency. It's the NFL. What happened to my college football? But the data says that more people are interested, engaged, in watching than ever. And some people say this is part of it. We couldn't look away from Coach Prime. He turned over the entire roster. Everyone had their hands up, but they're like, yeah, but we couldn't keep our eyes off it. By the way, Notre Dame, their quarterback who they brought in was kind of exciting. People were talking about him. He adapted instantly to Notre Dame. Like, it almost seems to me it makes it more interesting and compelling. What do you think?
I think my old college football is dead, and I used to lament and used to rally against my college football dying, and it's out of the room.
It went to heaven.
Yeah,
it went to football's Valhalla.
Yes,
as Bob
yes.
Ufer might say.
Perfect. I've just embraced what's new. I think what's exciting about it, and you say there is some excitement.
There is.
Because we don't know how things are shaking out, how the patterns are going to go. I see a lot of very interesting ramifications. What's happening to these teams? So we're now through like year 3 of these new rules and these new setups. And one of the things that we're seeing is that when there's a coaching change at a university, about 24 of your 85 scholarship players are immediately going into the portal. Some are going to return based on who you get as the new coach, but most aren't going to anyway. And if the new coach comes in from an existing program, he's going to bring many of the best players he has as possible from his old program to the new program. So imagine if your school hires a head coach from your rival, your new team is probably going to look a lot like your rival, the people you hated.
Yeah.
And they're now going to be on that roster. Plus, here it is on the other end. Let's say you lose your head coach to another college team. Expect your roster to get decimated because your departing coach is going to take his best players with him to his new destination. So how do you combat that if you're an administrator? One, it puts an additional premium on keeping your head coach so that you don't become a victim in all of this. It's one thing not to have a great program and you have to fire your head coach and you're going to lose your roster this way. But if you're too good, you got to secure your head coach so he doesn't leave and go somewhere else and take your roster, decimating it anyway.
Absolutely.
So how do you keep your head coach? Well, you pay them a lot more and you have less restrictive buyouts and higher pools for assistant coaches. And then who's paying for all of this? Well, more and more, it's going to be the fan base. Head coaches that are successful when they can recruit well. And better recruiting comes through on-field success and NIL. And NIL is going to be raised through the community and the fan base. Also, colleges hire guys from the NFL to be their head coaches. So I just mentioned that if you lose your head coach, a whole bunch of players are going through the portal. You bring an NFL coach or an assistant to be your new head coach, he can't bring people from the NFL
That's right.
to join your university.
That's interesting.
So now he is literally coming in with nobody and has to scour the portal for those replacements. Now, if he has a great reputation, he might be able to do well.
It's a great point. So in those interviews, part of the interview with a college coach, say from Oregon State, is even though there's the geography in Michigan State, yeah, sure, there's probably an opportunity to bring some of my players with me. Can't do that from the NFL, whether you're an assistant or a head coach or whatever, right? So that's interesting, Steve. Good point.
These are just the things that I think as an administrator you have to be thinking about. So right now, Michigan is in a good position because they have a head coach that people want to play for. Their on-field success is good as well. If you're in the middle of the road or at the bottom, it's really, really hard. You just got to hope that reshuffling the deck allows you to deal a new set of cards and you come up golden.
Well, that's really Purdue's use case, right? Is it with Jeff Brom going to Louisville? I assume they lost players to Louisville. I don't know, but they went from a team that was in the Big Ten championship game to really rough season, right?
Yeah, and Purdue is stealing players from Illinois. So,
Okay.
so Ryan Walters came from Illinois.
Okay.
A couple of the assistant coaches with him, and just over the weekend, Illinois starting tailback announced he's transferring to Purdue.
Yeah. As soon as you put on the wing and helmet, though, I feel like fans are like A.J. Barner from Indiana. He's ours. He's wearing the jersey. That's a Seinfeld bit where he says we don't root for the players or the team. We root for the jersey because once you leave, we don't care about you anymore, which is true, and it's happening here. But A.J. Barner, we feel like he had a great season, right? He's as much of a Michigan man as, the next guy.
Oh, and there might be more Indiana players coming.
Ooh,
so there's a wide receiver out of Indiana, Donovan McCauley, who's a former
quarterback. And they've
quarterback.
had good receivers, right? I mean, I feel like we get beaten by these guys. Not we got beaten once, but beaten like they've had some good games against
Indiana's
us, right?
offense under Kevin Wilson back in the 2010s were very, very good. And eventually Tom Allen, it died. The offensive juggernaut of Indiana died.
Football's Valhalla.
Yes. And Kalen DeBoer went over to coach Fresno State, then eventually Washington, and they're in the playoff. Tom Allen, by the way, looking like to be the new defensive coordinator of Penn State, hasn't been confirmed at the time of the recording.
Because Manny Diaz took off. Now, where did he go?
Manny Diaz went to Duke.
Did he bring his watch gesture with him? That he did or whatever.
Well, who knows what Penn State players...
His signs.
Who knows what Penn State players he may be taken to Duke. Probably not any of the good ones because it would be kind of a downgrade.
I tell you what, man, they were pretty good. They had a really
awesome
good defense.
Yeah. Awesome defense, and a lot of those guys are going to go to the NFL, and Penn State continues to recruit well. An explosive new offensive coordinator. I've heard this before, though. James Franklin has hired explosive offensive coordinators out of the Big 12. Their last offensive coordinator was an explosive OC from Oklahoma State and fired him too.
He's on his last deck shuffling, I think, Steve.
Just about.
Yeah, I think he's just about there. And Ryan Day fired his quarterback. He's going to stick, I assume, with his defensive coordinator.
Oh, yeah, because the defense was great this year.
Yeah, they fixed their problem.
He could not fire his defensive coordinator. He could not fire himself, so therefore he fired Kyle McCord.
It's amazing.
Who actually wanted a pay raise.
He wanted a pay raise.
He wanted a pay raise the day after losing to Ohio State, apparently.
Look, this is a young man. He had a good season. It's not like, it's wild. Steve, by the way, did you get your press credential approved? Last time we kind of had a cliffhanger. We did
because we were seeing all our counterparts getting their press credentials, and including you.
Me.
Yes. Wait a minute. You were one of those people.
I had sent it out to get it framed, and you were still waiting to get yours. I assume you got the green light.
Yes.
All right. Cool.
I will be there. We will start planning. When we do our next podcast, I think we're going to talk about some Rose Bowl history.
Yeah, let's do that. We might do something a little creative for our next one. We're not sure because it's going to fall right around that Christmas week. So we'll see. So stay tuned for that.
Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Steve Clark02 on Twitter. You are M. Victors on Twitter. Indeed. We're also trying to see if we can do the Countdown to Kickoff pregame show from a very, very special venue. I think you know what that place may be.
Wait, pregame for the Rose Bowl?
Yes.
Wait,
might be at a very special venue.
Kansas City. Somewhere. Yes. Canton, Ohio.
Do not want to jinx it, but it's like within this little 5 foot by 5 foot area that would just absolutely be the best and would be a dream come true. You will be there.
Yeah, and I may be a part of that live. I heard from the show producer, our friend Ira Weintraub, if it happens. So we'll see. That would be awesome. Steve, what else? Any other messages to our listeners?
Just thanks for listening. It's been, what we had hoped for when we first started out in June and started talking about these things like NIL and how to build a roster and how this 2023 football team is going to shape up. So now Michigan has to finish the deal by beating Alabama. And we'll talk about the history of the Rose Bowl as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I will give you guys a little download, impress your friends, win your trivia contest on the Rose Bowl, which will be coming up a lot around in these days. So, Steve,
we are just about out of here, but we'll remind people once again that Michigan is
back to back
Big Ten champions. Go Blue, Greg.
Go Blue.